Hello, everybody. I wanted to take today and talk about the food outlook over the next 2 years. We're going to start off by going over an article that George Gammon went over yesterday about Brits are being warned of apocalyptic food prices. A quarter of Britons have resorted to skipping meals as inflationary pressures and a worsening food crisis conflate in what Bank of England recently dubbed as apocalyptic outcome for consumers. Now, in addition to this, inflation is at a 40-year high of 9% from their government's cooked inflation numbers. So that's probably more like 20% in reality. And this is the UK where it's talking about people skipping meals. This is a first world country with a first world economy and one of the best infrastructures in the world. This isn't Africa. This isn't the Middle East where the US pulled out of Afghanistan and the whole region is destabilized and you can't grow any food there anyways. This is Great Britain. This is a first world country. I want to go over to the food price index next. During March 2020, giant QE, Fed money, Fed jumps in to save the economy, stimulus checks, massive money pumped into the situation in the trillions of dollars. Food, this chart is based off of the weighted average of cereal, vegetable oil, and meal and other food prices. Food prices from March 2020 to April, May actually decline. So this is based on $100 from 2010. It actually declines roughly $15 down to about $85 in May of 2020. And now here we are 2 years later and food prices have doubled from that point. Doubled already. How much of this has to come from that the economy being totally shut down in this area too for the better part of a year and a half? That's another good point George Gammon brought up. What would the food prices look like now if we didn't shut down the economy for a year and a half back here? Who knows? That's just another point I wanted to bring up. So now the Ukraine-Russia war comes into the mix. Would we have been able to handle this if we hadn't shut down the economy? Probably, but we did, and food prices doubled prior to that war even starting. So now that this war is going on, let's see just how much wheat comes out of these countries. So, according to this article from UC Davis, a roughly 1% decrease in the calories from these commodities leads to the average price increase from 7%. So, 1% decrease in calories from the major food of the world, which is rice, corn, wheat, other commodities. A 1% decrease in calories from these commodities leads to an average price increase by 7%. And so this article talks about removing 55 tons of metric tons of wheat and 30 million metric tons of corn entails a 2.7 reduction in the available supply of calories from the big four commodities. So this is saying there's going to be a 2.7% reduction in the available supply of calories from Russia Ukraine over this last year. So a 2.7 supply or a 2.7% decrease in supply should lead to a roughly 19% increase in prices. Yet before that, we already saw prices double. So now you add on another 20% to the prices already doubling for most of the world. The US gets most of its food, can produce most of its food domestically. But if you talk about the rest of the world where prices have already doubled and then some, and then you add on another roughly 20% supply shock on top of that already doubled number, now you're getting into some crazy doubling, tripling type things because the supply shock is just so great. I don't think food, and I think this article is missing something because the title of this article is We're Not Facing a Global Food Crisis. The US isn't facing a global food crisis because the US produces more food than it consumes by a humongous degree. It has the Midwest, which produces far, far, far more food than the US actually needs, and we're actually an exporter of food. So we talk about this 2.7 reduction in the availability of calories, which should lead to that roughly 20%, 19% increase. But food prices have already doubled because we shut down half the economy of the world. And now I think the bigger problem is the fertilizer. So Russia produces $7.6 billion a year in fertilizer, making it the first largest exporter of fertilizer in the world. And many economies of the world have all agreed to cut Russia out of the international system. Just saying, no, we're not going to buy oil from you. We're not going to buy goods from you. You are no longer allowed to participate in the global economy. And these fertilizers have a levered effect on the production of many food producers. So if you don't get this fertilizer, you're a multiple less productive than if you did have this fertilizer in many countries around the world. And we're already seeing this crazy high food price index rise prior to this Russia Ukraine war, which now is only roughly 2.5 months in. And a lot of this fertilizer isn't going to be online for next year. So we're already having these food issues now. So what happens next year when the number one exporter of fertilizer in the world, and then you have Ukraine, which is another large exporter of fertilizer in the world. So now you take roughly 28% of the fertilizer supply offline on top of these other food concerns. You're going to have massive famine starvation events in these third world countries that are the people that are the countries that are at the poorest and most vulnerable to these types of price increases. The Africas, the Middle East of the world, those are the places where that are going to get hit the hardest. And if the UK is already talking about Britain skipping meals because of food prices, how much worse is it going to get in these industrialized countries of the world if it's already this bad and inflation's already so high? On top of that, I wanted to talk about we've only talked about the things related to food. Energy prices are sky high. The price to ship things are increased. Shipping lanes are contested in the region near Ukraine. The US dollar is in an inflationary cycle and the price of everything is going up because the money supply is increasing. And the Fed has recently started tightening, creating a whole slew of problems for the rest of the world economy. The UK is barely keeping pace with the America's interest rate hikes, and their inflation rate is even higher than the U.S. is at 9%. Trying to keep up with the U.S. How much of an effect is all of this going to have on the price of food over the next few years? It's hard to see how you're not going to see at least another doubling of food prices from where they're at today 2 years from now or a year from now. Maybe not in the U.S. because we are such a large producer of food ourselves and the government can step in and ban the export of food if we have those problems. But in the rest of the world, Africa and the Middle East especially, China is another huge importer of grains and food. What's going to happen in all those regions of the world when we stop shipping out all of our food and this fertilizer crisis really starts to hit home and take its effect in the next year and a half? And if this Ukraine war escalates, how much worse is this grain and fertilizer problem going to be? Is it going to bleed into countries around it? Who knows? Every single thing outside of food is in its own inflationary cycle, making the cost of importing and exporting and moving food around even more expensive on top of the other supply issues that you now have with food. So on top of the supply issues, you have the logistical issues. So now I'm just going to talk about some things that I think everyone should do. I do it myself. I think everyone should do it. I think it's crazy if you don't have at least a 90-day supply of food on hand. If you guys are interested on how I did this, I'll make a video about it in the future. Just let me know. I just it doesn't make sense to me why people don't have at least a 90-day supply of food on hand. We have car insurance, we have life insurance, we have health insurance, but most of us have no grocery store is closed for 2-week insurance. Most of us have no food insurance. Most of us could not go 2 weeks without going to the grocery store without being in big trouble in a lot of in these industrialized Western worlds. Get some food insurance. When people get hungry, they get aggressive too. Protect yourself, your home, your family, whatever that means. That means if you're in America and you want to get a firearm, I think that's another thing that's wise to do as well. It's not uh, it's not like you have to be a crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist to see all of these things together adding up, creating a problem in the rest of the world. Saying that a problem like this cannot bleed into America is very naive, and I think it's also very unwise because the steps taken or the steps that you can take in order to avoid being in a bad situation as a result of a problem like this are really not that difficult to begin with. 90 days supply of food on me, my family of four, costs me roughly $500 US dollars for all of the supplies needed to do it. That includes the Mylar bags, food storage buckets, the food itself, all of that for $500 for a 3 month supply of rice and beans. It's really not that difficult to do in order to have that peace of mind. If things really did go bad, you can hunker down and you and your family are good for 3 months roughly. If you want to go more than that, you can. Uh, hope this makes you guys think a little bit about what the next few years is going to be like. I think food prices are probably going to double again from here at least. And if you're in those regions like Africa and the Middle East, you're just not going to have access to food. Poor socioeconomic classes usually get hit the hardest. If you want to learn about this U.S. inflationary rate hike or the rate hike cycle in the United States and the inflation going on right now, I will leave a link to that up here in the corner as well as at the end of the video. Like, subscribe, be sure to like and subscribe if you got anything useful out of this video. I will see you guys in the next one.